This is just a quick intro before the episode begins. Today we've got my guest, Ann Swanson, and she and I will be talking about not only the contents of her book, The Science of Yoga, but we'll also be diving in a number of lessons around movement, healthy movement, anatomy, teaching yoga. So stay tuned for this exciting episode. And don't forget to check the show notes for important links that'll help you bring even more learning to this experience of watching this particular episode. Thanks for being here. We'll get started in a minute. Hi there.
Hey, let me just change my
Of
speaker
course,
to this.
it is great to
Mic.
see you.
Oh, it's not plugged in. That's why it's not showing up.
I know the electronic part of this is sometimes challenging. Awesome. I'm so glad to see you. So glad that we have this chance to get together. And I've been avidly diving into your book
Oh,
as
good.
I've been preparing for getting together with you here. So amazing, amazing. So yeah, just let's see how that sounds. Sounds good. I
Is
can.
this better? Yeah, this is the mic.
Great. That is
Okay, good.
great. That is great. Well, welcome.
Thanks. It's so nice to meet you.
Yes, so nice to meet you too. I always love when I have these connections and we're able to find the time to do it on the podcast here, get together and find out more about you and give you an opportunity to share your expertise. It's certainly an area that I have spent like my whole life up until this point, just about studying. So it's definitely something that's near and dear to my heart. So welcome, welcome. Why don't we start out? Why don't you, for people who aren't familiar with your work, just give me a little bit of background about who you are and what you do.
Yes, my name is Ann Swanson. I wrote the book Science of Yoga, and there's a recent second edition. Yes, the second edition with the purple cover now just recently came out. I've written also another book with the same publisher. It's called Meditation for the Real World. And I have a master's of science in yoga therapy. So my journey really started though way back when I myself dealt with a lot of pain and anxiety. So as many people, I turned to yoga and then wanted to share it with other people because it worked for me. And I studied Tai Chi in China and yoga in India and was pretty convinced that I needed to understand the anatomy, the physiology, the research, the neurology behind how yoga works in order to be the best yoga teacher I could be. So I came back to the US with my like undergraduate in art degree, art. So I did not have that science background and I started from scratch with the pre-med course load and worked in a cadaver lab and became a massage therapist and ultimately earned my Master of Science in yoga therapy. So that's kind of how it came together, both the art and science. You know, the book Science of Yoga, both of my books incorporate a lot of beautiful images. I got to work with some of the best artists in the world. So it came full circle for me to combine both the art of yoga and the science of yoga.
Interesting. I'd love to know a little bit more if you're willing to share. I feel like that inspiration to shift from practicing yoga to teaching yoga because it helped the individual so much. I feel like that is, um, somewhat a common experience of teachers, but the experience of each individual teacher can be so different. So tell me a little bit about what was happening for you that you felt yoga was really a match to help you move forward.
I dealt with chronic pain since I was a teenager, and I actually didn't realize I had something different than other people until I got to college, and I realized that not everybody was feeling debilitating pain if they ate foods that were inflammatory or stayed up too late studying, or, I had a glass of wine, immediately pain. So for me, this pain, this joint pain, systemically, it was like related to inflammation. And I then started approaching different ways to help it. And the thing that helped me most was mind-body practices and meditation. And we know that when pain becomes chronic, when it's persistent like that, that it's not just the body. It's actually a misinterpretation of the brain, misinterpreting the alarm signals that the body's sounding. They're not really something that needs to be addressed. It wasn't, I didn't have something going on in my body at age 18. The arthritis was not there at the same level as it is now. So it was my brain's misinterpretation of that pain. So working with the mind has been a really big part of that. The other thing is anxiety. And ironically, when there's a problem in the body, like the pain, the solution's often in the head, with meditation and that mindfulness aspect. But when there's a problem in the mind, like anxiety or a problem, the mental health, the solution's often in the body. So that physical movement aspect of it made a huge difference for my anxiety.
Mhm. It's interesting. I spend a lot of time on TikTok, more as a consumer than a creator, although I do have a TikTok page. I get way more traction on my Instagram with respect to what I do, the work I do. But I love TikTok as a consumer, and there are so many young people on TikTok with anxiety, with joint pain, with
Yes.
inflammation. There's this girl that I see occasionally pop up on my page that has abdominal distension to the extent that she looks like she's pregnant. And when I go into the comments and I see all these women that comment, I have that every time I eat, I have that too. Why doesn't that go away? I am just struck by just the preponderance of inflammatory type
Yeah.
and anxiety, which sort of goes together.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, it started when I was very young, but I felt different from everybody. I didn't have TikTok back then to connect with the other people, the young people in the world that were dealing with this. So I actually related to older people. When I became a yoga teacher, I taught in retirement communities. I taught centenarians. I taught in basically every unit of a retirement community. At age 22, I was going from the stroke recovery to dementia, to advanced dementia care, to assisted living, to all the parts of the retirement community. So I got a lot of experience working with people in pain, with joint mobility issues, limitations, with a plethora of health conditions, right? Because as we age, the more likely we're going to have cardiovascular conditions and osteoporosis as well as osteoarthritis. The majority of them had. So I then started to specialize in therapeutic approaches. And I got certified in yoga for arthritis and Tai Chi for arthritis, which are evidence-based programs. And then from there, yoga therapy and different aspects. So I really focus on helping people that have complex uh, pain, complex conditions, health conditions that are really holding them back. They feel like they maybe can't practice yoga. And so when I wrote Science of Yoga, I incorporated a lot of the things, even if you, as a yoga teacher, teach a class that has a mix of people, young people, you're going to get people in the room, as you mentioned, that have arthritis, that have fibromyalgia at a very young age, that have heart conditions, that have these issues. It's just going to be more common as we get older. So the older you get, the more those safety and the research behind yoga becomes important to understand.
I'm curious for the listener who's not super familiar with what yoga therapy is and how that
Yeah.
differs from therapy. And I know I've been teaching for 22 years. Yoga Alliance only of late has made a distinction between the two. So I
Yeah.
sort of feel like as an industry at some point within the past 10 years or so, that distinction was made between teaching yoga and yoga therapy. Share a little bit about what that looks like. What is yoga therapy and how is it different from teaching general group classes?
Yoga therapists that are certified through IAYT, International Association of Yoga Therapists, they have a C-IAYT. Basically, that is 800 hours of training that is much more in depth in the physiology, the philosophy, the research, and the application of the therapeutic principles to develop a therapeutic relationship. It's equivalent to a master's degree, and I did the only master's degree in yoga therapy. So that's it currently. And I did that program. And I'm glad I did the master's degree version of it because it really is the amount of in-depth research, the things you need to learn are equivalent to a master's degree. And I work a lot, as I said, with people with really complex conditions. I mean, I get referrals from nurses and physical therapists and people who say, you know, I've worked with them. This is what I do with them. Can you expand on it? Because it's that mind-body connection. It's the multifaceted approach that yoga has. And when you develop that therapeutic relationship, when you work with somebody one-on-one or in a small group of people, maybe that have arthritis, when you're working with them in that capacity, then you can really approach these complex issues like pain, which the medical system doesn't have clear answers for. So I get a lot of referrals from people like, I've done what I can. Now they're really interested in yoga. Can you help them? And if somebody is interested in yoga, they're more likely to practice it, right? They're more likely to do these things. So I see a lot of people transforming their lives in the way that I do. I did with my chronic pain and anxiety.
Yeah. Now, do you think that when you started, let's say when you took your first teacher training, did you have a vision that this is how you wanted to teach? This is the area of expertise you wanted to dive into? Was it born from your own personal experience? I mean, now that you're
Yeah.
well beyond that, do you have a memory of maybe what your initial inspiration was, and does that match what you're doing now?
Really good question. People don't really ask me that. Starting at a very young age, like when I was in kindergarten, I always connected with older adults. And my mom would, for the weekend, take me to the retirement community just to visit people. Like I connected deeply with my grandfather, who is now a centenarian himself. He's 100 years old. Just recently, I had my first son, and that was his first great grandchild. So they were introduced just recently. So I've always had special relationships with people older than me. And I think that, along with in some ways, when I was in my early 20s, feeling like my body was older than it was, right? And I was limited in a lot of ways. That made me be able to adapt the practices and really work with older people. But yeah, I think that that's what really drew me to it is just a special connection. The old soul, I don't know. And you know, as a yoga teacher, I always found that I was able to get more jobs, better paid when I was working in those retirement community settings. I mean, you need to have more training in the science of yoga to be able to adapt appropriately, to be able to provide accessible practices that are, you know, evidence-based. They really are looking in those hospital type settings for making sure you have evidence-informed practices, you understand some of the research. So that was part of that amalgamation of me becoming a science of yoga expert. Like, what do I need to know practically to apply to help these folks?
Mhm. That's so interesting in hearing you describe it because your affinity or your connection to older folks when you were younger has sort of played its way as a common thread through so much of what you do. So it's almost like you were destined for this, which is something on a soul level that is kind of curious to think about.
I think a lot of yoga teachers feel that way, or if you really pay attention, you're like, notice what kind of classes do you enjoy teaching? Because when I would substitute or teach a studio class and it was all younger people and we'd put music in the background and because I knew that's what they wanted, you know, at the end of the class, I didn't get as deep of thank yous. I didn't get as much of a connection to the students. I did enjoy doing that, and I could teach a wide variety of classes. I think that's good to be able to do and to be able to guide myself through classes. But there was something about teaching older adults that really made me feel like I was making an impact and gave me so much joy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It also triggers in my mind when you were speaking. I talk to so many yoga teachers who say, if I'm teaching a group class and there's one or two older people, I'm so worried about them. I'm worried they'll
Yes.
keep up. I have memories of when I was a newer teacher, this older man was in my class, and I was so worried about him, but he just impressed me so much by modifying himself. I went over a couple times to help him, and he was by a wall, he was able to adapt kind of intuitively. And from that point forward, of course, with my anatomy background, I knew how to offer modifications, but it just was such an illustration of we don't have to worry about people. But I'm curious what comes up for you when you hear that sort of thing from teachers.
Yeah, I mean, if even if you teach mostly younger people, maybe you're in your early 20s and you teach people in your early 20s, there's going to be older people that come to your classes and you want to be able to serve and adapt for them, as well as younger people who have some of these same problems, of
Right.
course, or pregnant people or people with these different needs for modifications that are
Right.
appropriate to enhance their practice and make it accessible. So I think continuing to learn and understand that everybody is the world's leading expert in their own body. So you can learn from them too and empower them to know that. Constantly tell them that they can modify and listen to their body. What do they need to do? Give them suggestions, and the more you learn, of set suggestions, it's good. So that's why we always have to be lifelong learners, continuing to learn, but also understanding that they, as you said, can listen to their body. And so empowering them to adapt, to sit out, to take a few moments to watch, to stay after class and ask you to like workshop it with you. You may not know the answer, but you can ask them questions to help them find the answer or refer them to somebody who can.
Mm. Yeah, it reminds me too of a lot of the women that I work with in my signature program when we talk about sequencing. If they are teaching older folks primarily, they oftentimes will say, I don't feel like they can do XYZ pose.
Mm,
Really common thing is they can't do high to low push-ups, so I just don't offer it. And I'm curious what you think about that, only in that when I think about it from the need to continue to build strength, even as we
yeah.
age, that eliminating something from a sequence for fear that the person's too old to quote unquote do it sort of takes that agency away from that person to have that exposure. Even if we just look at it musculoskeletally, no exposure to weight bearing on the arms can lead to other problems in mobility and strength. God forbid you need to use a walker or you have to use crutches. I know for my mom, when she injured her shoulder, lo and behold, she had no upper body strength. We did not know until she needed to use her upper body. So what are your thoughts on sort of eliminating certain things, assuming people are too old to do it?
Mm, yes, you spotlighted that perfectly, Karen. I don't think we should be fearful and we should limit our students. So giving options is always going to be the best way. Show different options. And maybe you do demonstrate the knee down version or go to the wall. I do push-ups on the wall with people with wrist issues whose shoulders can't bear it. You can do them at the wall. You can do them in various modifications on a chair against the wall. So providing appropriate modifications, of course, is going to be really helpful, or variations, as I call them in the book. That's a better word because it's not less than. It's just a different way of doing it. I mean, I do push-ups on the wall all the time. When I was pregnant, I had to. I couldn't get on the floor without help to get back up again. So it's something that's helpful for many people. And also, if you don't use it, you lose it. So you need to have that impact. When we talk about working with people that have limitations or older adults, it doesn't just mean gentle, relaxing yoga. Actually, I think it means more strengthening yoga. More balance and fall prevention is huge. When you fall, the impact is on your entire life. You start to go downhill from there based off of the research. So if we can help people feel empowered to not have that fear of falling that makes them stiffen up, that holds them back from doing the things they love, like gardening, then we can make a huge impact in their life. If we can teach them how to get up and down from the floor, that's a skill that you need to learn. And yoga teachers can teach that. That's something I teach to almost all of my students. If they are not able to do that, we pretty much learn how. Even if you need to have help with the chair or the wall, you need to be able to get off the floor if you fall to go call, right? So it could be life-saving. So we want to work on strengthening and those critical skills as well as balance and fall prevention. So get stronger. I mean, give variations. Let me give an example. Maybe I would teach a class in the retirement community, and it would be mixed sometimes, although I taught at the different units. There would be a mix. There'd be some people in a wheelchair and some people that could be on the floor, and some people that maybe needed to hold on to the chair for balance. So we'll say we're doing like chair pose. The person in the wheelchair, and actually probably get everybody to sit in the chair for a moment. We're all going to practice squeeze your glutes, and you can do this as you're listening right now. Squeeze your glutes and thighs. Feel yourself lifting up as if you're trying to get out of the chair. Even if they haven't gotten out of the chair for years, they know that feeling of trying to get out of a chair. You're going to feel your core lift. You're going to lean slightly forward, engage. That's their chair pose. We all practice that. The people in the wheelchair are going to keep practicing that and going in and out of that as we continue to progress the class. The people maybe seated in the chair are now perhaps going to hold the side of the chair and try to lift up to standing and back down to seated. That's a skill that could save their life. That's their independent skill, being able to get in and out of the chair. And then the folks that now feel comfortable with both of those options are going to come up and stand into chair pose or hover over the chair, knowing they can sit down when they need a rest. So we can teach those various options all in the same class, but maybe start everybody with the base option. Even squeezing your thighs, that's something we can all do when we're sitting in our chair at the desk too long. So it's not lesser than. You're still getting something and you can integrate it through your day. So that's how I would teach a pose like that, is to give those variations and empower people to take it to where they feel comfortable. But we got to strengthen. Get up and strengthen when you get older.
Yeah, I love those examples. I remember one of my first jobs out of school was I worked in a head injury facility and I was a discharge planner. So I was part of the interdisciplinary team with the orthopedic surgeon and the general practitioner and the PT and the OT and the speech therapist. And we would talk about miracles of rehab in really small increments. Even something like he can squeeze his thighs together in a wheelchair is
Yes.
progress. Now, granted, that's a clinical setting, but I think oftentimes yoga teachers think of these big gross motor movements. And when you're working with people as you are, sometimes we're sort of, I hate to use this word, but we're sort of regressing things and looking for tactile things that even can trigger some muscular contraction.
Yes, absolutely. They can do something that's strengthening. We can do chair pose against the wall also. If knees are the barrier and they feel like, you know, even coming out of the chair or going downstairs for some people can put a lot of pressure on their knees. And
Mm.
so they may feel like, oh, I can't do yoga because it puts that pressure. Well, do chair pose against the wall. Then your knee is not having that same pressure on it as you can kind of support and lean back, but you're getting all the same strengthening. If anybody's done a wall sit, you know it's just as
Oh,
hard.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I was thinking when you were saying against a wall, that's the first thing I thought of is a wall sit, which is really hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I do that as a wall sit with my back against the wall, but then I'll also, if you feel comfortable, you can take it a little further and look as if you're doing chair pose by leaning your core forward so your hips are still against the wall. So there's so many variations you can do. And when we look at the science of yoga, the research on yoga, it's not usually focused on young, fit, thin, active people doing yoga like the market makes it look, like the marketing makes it look on the billboards and the covers of the magazine. When we're talking about the science of yoga, the research studies are on yoga for people with osteoarthritis, for multiple sclerosis, for balance and fall prevention. They're on clinical populations and anxiety, depression. Those are big areas. Cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure. These are the clinical populations that are really benefiting from this lifestyle practice. It's lifestyle medicine. And so we're getting the exercise component with asana. We're also getting the breathing through pranayama and mindfulness and meditation. We're getting all of these components, but then it also helps you make better lifestyle decisions. So this is what the research is on. That's why I wanted to dive into the science of yoga, is because it's not in alignment with what you think of when you think of yoga. It's or what many people think of, what the magazine covers and the videos make it look like. It's accessible. It's modified. The research studies modify it. They do it in the chair. They have options with blocks or props or you know, individual variations that we as teachers need to provide.
Yeah, I think that moniker you described sort of equates to yoga means stretching, i.e., flexibility, greater
Yeah.
flexibility. So I feel like that model, or that do yoga, this is the result you'll get, is sort of ingrained in people's mind, which is why so many people say, I can't do yoga because I'm not flexible. And yet,
Exactly.
everything you just shared, and it sounds like what the research is showing, is that there are so obviously so many other benefits to doing yoga that anyone at any age can benefit from.
There's benefits to every single system of your body. There's benefits at a cellular level, at a DNA expression of your genes level. There's benefits on so many levels. And that's what I really wanted to instill in both the Science of Yoga book, and as well as I have like a course, a certification on Science of Yoga, is what are the benefits to each system of the body? And then how does that all come together holistically to benefit our lives, to help us be happier, healthier people that feel fulfilled? And so, yeah, I think people just focus on the muscles and bones. Everything's muscles
Yeah.
and bones. That's what does well on TikTok, right? Do the
Yeah.
pose like this, not like that. And this is the right way and wrong way. And this is how it affects your muscles. It's so much more than that. Of course, it affects your nervous system. And there's so much to say about the neuroscience behind yoga, but also the immune system, less sick days at work, cardiovascular system, lowering blood pressure to clinically meaningful levels to the point where people can have doctor approved reductions in their blood pressure medication. This is the evidence that we have to support yoga. It's so much beyond the muscles and bones. Actually, I would say that's a very small portion in comparison when we look at the mental health that and benefits from yoga. That's what the research is showing. We see profound differences in anxiety, depression, pain, sleep.
Hmm. I'm curious from a neuroscience standpoint. That's one of my areas that I love to dive into. And there's so much more of an emphasis these days on understanding how to keep neural pathways active even as we age. And
Yeah.
there's more, I think, in the common vernacular, certainly a lot of podcasts about neuroplasticity. Can you talk a little bit about that and how yoga can help you build new neural pathways, how it's really age agnostic? Maybe it's a little harder when
Yeah.
you're older, yet you can still do it.
Yes, absolutely. And in Science of Yoga book, I equate this to the philosophical uh, term of samskaras. So we look at samskaras as these impressions in our lifetime that, according to the philosophy, would affect your next lifetime. Well, what we're seeing now in the evidence is that we can change our brain throughout our lifetime. And we can also change genetic expression throughout our own lifetime, but also for your children. So through generations, we can either pass on generational trauma or generational resilience and better genetic expression. And that's all through lifestyle. And so through your lifetime, we have two really important processes. We have neuroplasticity. That's your brain being plastic. It's moldable. It can, plastic kind of bends. It can continue to change through your lifetime. And neuroplasticity is really, really strong when you're a baby. My 6-month-old is learning very rapidly, but it does tend to be a little harder as we get older. Perhaps we could think of that as the samskaras. They're like deeply ingrained. Our karma, our actions have ingrained these habits really deeply. Same with the neural pathways. The axons, the connections are very deeply connected between the different neurons. There's certain pathways and habits that we have. So it can get a little harder as we get older, but it does work throughout our entire lifetime. I mean, my 100-year-old grandpa is still learning things. He still reads, he still keeps up with the news, he's still learning new movements and different things he can do. So it lasts through the lifetime. Now, neurogenesis is something we used to only think happened when you're younger. That's the creation of new neurons, genesis, creation. And now we see that it very clearly have creation of new neurons in critical areas of the brain throughout the lifetime. And one of them being the hippocampus. And I talk about this in Science of Yoga too, that we see there's new neurons and new connections in the hippocampus, which is our memory center. Now, wouldn't we all like to have a better memory, better learning capacity, better working memory as I'm talking to you now, remembering what I said a few minutes ago, but also better long-term memory? Well, you can improve those as you age. You could actually create new neurons as you age. And so there's a lot of hope there, and that yoga promotes neuroplasticity. And it seems that it may help with that neurogenesis too, creating the proper baseline to make that happen. When we practice yoga, we see an increase of something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This BDNF is going to help facilitate neuroplasticity. So the more we have it, the more able we are to create good habits, to have those better engraved pathways that are in the direction we want to go to have healthier habits. So that happens throughout the lifetime.
Mhm. I'm curious in the research, is there a connection between um, frequency and duration of yoga practice with respect to benefits in general or any particular benefit?
Yes. So generally what they've found is a proper dosage, although it depends, but generally the dosage and research studies is 8 weeks, twice a week to see the benefits that we generally are talking about. Like when I say with Dr. Sarah Lazar, she's a Harvard researcher who works with yoga and meditation. I worked with her on Meditation for the Real World, my second book. And when I talked to her about it, we integrated a lot of her research where they saw that there's changes in 8 weeks for the brain in critical gray matter areas. So the density of the prefrontal cortex increases, the insula, critical areas of the brain increase. So basically, 50-year-old meditators had brains similar to 25-year-old non-meditators in some of her research. And that was, 8 weeks. That's what we typically are doing in research. And generally, it's a full practice, but sometimes it has homework of 20 minutes or something smaller like that. But what we're seeing now is more and more research coming out of these smaller little moments, 5-minute practice or 10-minute practice. And there seems to be promise in that just because that's the established thing in the research all the way from the early 2000s and 90s. We did about that duration and frequency doesn't mean that's what you need necessarily. That's just what we see for those clinical results in 8 weeks generally. So we're seeing that like 5 minutes, these what I call yoga snacks. And I call it yoga snacks, not just because it's like a little break, but because that's what the exercise science world is calling those little breaks that we do through the day of movement. They're calling them exercise snacks.
I've heard this on, I'm forgetting her name. She has the really long hair.
Rhonda Patrick.
I've heard it on her podcast. Yeah. I've heard
Yes.
Huberman and a lot of them talk. They
Oh,
use,
they all copy Rhonda Patrick. She's
yeah.
awesome. So, exercise snacks are less than 15 minutes generally, depending on the researcher. All the researchers have different descriptions of it, but some of them are as short as 30 seconds. Some of them are, running up the stairs in your midday, or one really well-researched one is 10-minute walk after you eat. And we even find that 2 minutes of walking after you eat makes a profound difference. Because when we eat, we have a blood sugar spike. The glucose levels go up. They're in our blood, they're free floating. And then we could possibly have that crash, that afternoon crash. You have that sugar crash and you feel fatigue and maybe moody. That's when you have a really high spike and then you have a crash. So to prevent that crash and also those high spikes, which we now know are involved not only in metabolic health and diabetes, but also inflammation. They cause inflammation. So if we want to prevent some of those really high spikes and that subsequent crash, then we can just walk after we eat. 10 minutes. Walking meditation, just go for a walk with your family and chit chat. 10 minutes. That's all you need to do. Well, 2 minutes makes a big difference too. And it doesn't have to be walking because the whole philosophy is that you're using the biggest muscles of your body. So you don't have time to go outside and walk or go pace down the hallway. Maybe you have less room. That's great. You could have your yoga mat, do some sun salutations. We even find doing chair poses, very short practices, 30 seconds, less than a minute of chair poses every 20 minutes to break up long, prolonged sitting. We sit in that sedentary lifestyle for so long. If we break that up, we improve our cognition, our focus, cerebral blood flow. So when you've been sitting for so long at your computer, just get up and do some chair poses. Do what I said before, come in and out of it standing from a chair. That can make a big difference in your cognition as well as your blood sugar spikes. So I've been integrating these more and more into my life, spreading these short little breaks through the day. And students love this too because it takes the pressure off. It's not a whole hour of yoga that you need to do to make a difference.
Yeah, I usually walk my dog after I eat my dinner, and that's how
Mhm.
integrate that 10-minute walk. And it sort of reminds me or kind of makes me laugh because yes, I remember when I started taking yoga classes, the class was 90 minutes. You almost never see a 90-minute class anymore on schedules. And between getting to the class, taking the class, and coming home, it was like a 3-hour
Yeah.
pilgrimage. And this was like 1999, 2000. And now everything that I do is very much like you're outlining. It's like 20 minutes of this or 10 minutes of that, maybe a 30-minute run, but everything else is sort of chunks. And this concept of exercise snacking or yoga snacks makes it easier for people to blend it into their day, right?
Yeah, it makes it so much easier for my clients, my one-on-one clients, as well as students. They're like, oh, I can do that. That's one of those barriers to movement is I don't have the time. Well, you do. You can do it as a break, in between. You arrive to pick up your kids from school, you have a couple minutes waiting for them, do a little meditation, do some wrist yoga, because I know that's one area that I have a lot of issues with if I don't do my wrist and hand yoga. Do that right there in the car. So we can integrate these little snacks through our day and it makes a profound difference, especially in our anxiety too, as well as chronic pain like I deal with.
Yeah, I'm curious too. I mean, certainly as people age, the kind of not emergence, but the incidence of either an acute situation that turns chronic or a chronic, you were talking about metabolic health. So the first thing I think of is diabetes. The other
Mhm.
thing I think of is cancer, even cancer that's detected early and treatable. Then you go into the mode of, well, how do I prevent a recurrence, that type of thing. What research have you come across that speaks to cancer mitigation, either within a treatment protocol or post-treatment and remission, kind of keeping the body healthy to prevent a recurrence? Is there anything that comes to mind that?
Yeah. So first I want to say that between the first edition of Science of Yoga 6 years ago and the second edition that just came out, I updated some of the things and I looked at one particular area is you look at like bibliometric analyses, and that's like looking at all the research done on yoga and you see what's the trends in research. So
A meta-analysis of sorts.
Well, they're looking at all the meta-analyses, all of
Okay.
they're looking at how many yoga studies were there on cancer, how many were there on high blood pressure, cardiovascular, musculoskeletal. And it used to be, you know, the highest area was mental health and cardiovascular and musculoskeletal. And that's what I had in the first edition of the book. Now, cancer, I believe it's number one. Maybe it's mental health and then cancer. It really jumped up there. It wasn't even on the top list for the first edition, but cancer care is a huge area of growth in yoga research right now. And so, what we see is that yoga is often done as adjunctive alongside traditional medicine. And traditional medicine, chemo is really tough on the body. So if you can do things that are going to help lower inflammation, stress, improve sleep, improve pain, it's a game changer. So we're seeing really big impacts in that area. And then as far as prevention, whether it be of cancer, cardiovascular disease, these big killers, we see that yoga has great potential for prevention. And that's because yoga reduces inflammation, it reduces oxidative stress on the body, it improves our overall fitness. So, with the asana aspect, we're getting all the benefits of exercise, but we're also getting the benefits of relaxation, lowering cortisol levels, improving and increasing the uptake of serotonin so that we can have more balanced neurochemistry. So it has great benefit for prevention also. It's a little harder to do research on prevention. With cardiovascular, we can see that, we're lowering the precursors and the things that we're concerned about, like high blood pressure and cholesterol. We could see these really clear metrics. But it makes sense that it would also be preventative for many cancers if you can lower that load. And that's something that is talked a lot about in integrative medicine is the allostatic load. I speak to this in the endocrine system section of Science of Yoga. We have this load on our systems. And yeah, we maintain homeostasis. We have to maintain homeostasis or else we're dead, right? But how much load are we fighting against to maintain that homeostasis? Are you smoking? Are you not sleeping? Are you eating horrible food? Then your body has to work harder to maintain that homeostasis. So yoga takes some of that load off. And that's going to be less likely to get these chronic diseases that are lifestyle diseases. Remember, yoga is lifestyle medicine. So some of the research is coming out on cancer more recently, with regards to it being lifestyle medicine is from Dean Ornish, who has done research on cardiovascular disease and showed that yoga as part of a lifestyle intervention helped to not only reduce the risk or lower the impact, but reverse heart disease, something that a pill can't do. So it's a lifestyle disease, so we approach it through lifestyle, and yoga was part of that lifestyle. He used that same program for cancer, and we saw really great benefits for that too. So there's more and more research coming out about cancer, so I'm glad you asked that question.
Yeah. I want to take just a moment to talk a little more in detail about inflammation because I feel
Yeah.
like, certainly when people think about inflammation, they most commonly go to, I strained my knee and my knee's inflamed or swollen, or I don't know, I have Achilles tendonitis, something that's musculoskeletal and is kind of an acute situation from something they probably know they did. And it goes away, maybe a couple of Advil and a little bit of movement, and then it's gone. But you're talking about more chronic inflammation.
Yes.
Curious with the research, um, specifically looking at yoga and its impact on inflammation, separate from other forms of movement and its effect on inflammation. Have there been any studies that have looked at the two together, yoga and inflammation?
Yes, a lot. And so that's one of the areas I break down in the immune system section of the book. So I break it down by each system as well as in the Science of Yoga certification. It's like the immune system part. We're going to talk about inflammation and how that's affected with the immune system. And what we see is that yoga reduces key inflammatory markers in the blood. And we can actually measure these things. We can see that before a yoga practice or a meditation, immediately after we see changes, as well as within, perhaps most of the study's 8-week protocol, we see reductions in these inflammatory markers like IL-6 and TNF alpha. And these inflammatory markers can be indicative of autoimmune diseases, but not necessarily. You don't have to necessarily have a diagnosis. A lot of us deal with inflammation and we just don't know it. We think, oh, I feel extra gassy, that's just me being gassy. That could be inflammation. For me, my joint pain. My joint pain flares when I have inflammation. When I'm sick, my joint pain flares when I don't sleep well, lack of sleep makes your inflammation go higher. So we can reduce inflammation through the relaxation practice as well as through exercise, right? We see exercise reduces inflammation. Of course, you get the acute inflammation you're talking about when you're recovering. But overall, the practice of exercise reduces inflammation, and then meditation does too. So we combine those. Yoga has been shown to have some pretty profound impacts on your inflammatory markers.
That's great. So I'd love, right now we're talking generally about, yoga in general and doing yoga. And of course, we know there's so many different ways to do yoga and different styles, and it's been around for thousands of years. So, for people listening, when we're talking about, the benefits of yoga, does it matter what kind, or we talked a little bit about how long. So we said 8 weeks is a nice protocol, 2 times a week, I think you said. What are you doing in that? Does it matter what could you be doing restorative poses on your back and get the same benefit as if you're doing active vinyasa? Like what, because that's one of the things that comes up for me
Yeah.
when I do this. Like if I was going to create a protocol for myself, and it was just for general health and wellness, or maybe even it was something specific, like I just, recovered from chemotherapy and I'm in remission. Are there ways I'm customizing it based on the results I want to get?
Yeah, this is one of the most common questions. Like, what is the best type of yoga? What is the most effective? You've dove into the research, seen so many different protocols. Like, what is the best type? Well, I have the answer to the test. The absolute best type of yoga is the type you enjoy and actually do. It doesn't work if you don't do it. So I would say, whichever type you enjoy. If you enjoy hot yoga, great. If you enjoy, I don't, but if you do, great. If you enjoy restorative yoga, that's wonderful. If you enjoy a vinyasa flow, that's wonderful. Whatever's going to help you stick with it. Now, there are more benefits to vigorous exercise. So if you're not getting your vigorous exercise from your yoga, and vigorous is different for everybody, right? Vigorous for my 100-year-old grandpa is literally just coming up to standing to hold onto his walker and maybe walking to the bathroom. Like that's vigorous for him. But vigorous is different for everyone, but you need to get your vigorous exercise. So if you're just doing restorative yoga, what else are you doing in your lifestyle to give you the vigorous exercise where your heart rate is going up, where you are challenging yourself? So you got to make sure you're getting that somewhere. But yeah, whatever type of yoga you enjoy, that's the type that is the best.
Yeah, I think that definitely speaks to, maybe the need to have kind of a portfolio of activities, maybe a little bit of something that might be non-yoga based that does have that cardiac elevation, target heart
Yes.
rate type aspect, and then maybe yoga is an adjunct, to that.
Yes, and that was one of the things I dove into for the second edition of Science of Yoga is I was like, can you actually get your recommended cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory like limits? Can you get to 50 minutes, and get to 75% to 80% of max heart rate? Can you do that through yoga? Through sun salutations would be the way that we really get our heart rate up. And based off of the research, the answer is yes, you actually can, through sun salutations, reach that higher heart rate. That they measure it in METs and they see that some people were able to. However, I've tried it myself. I can't personally. I, wore the heart monitor and like really tried to get there. It was too much on my wrist to do it through sun salutations, right? Like jogging was an easier way for me to get that for my body's limitations. It was too much impact. So I think that some of my older adult students can get that through a chair sun salutation. They don't even need to get on the floor. They can get that higher elevated heart rate that is recommended. So it really depends on the person, but you might be able to get it. I have this whole like chart about sun salutations and that it's possible to get it through sun salutations, through a
Yeah,
vinyasa class.
yeah, I noticed for myself, I really can't get to my target heart rate doing yoga. And even recently, I started running outside since I live in Boston and the weather is a little bit better now. And it's even hard the way I'm running, like I'm not running fast enough because I've had 6 months of not running outside all
Hmm.
that I'm not really super close. I'm sort of on the edge of my target heart rate, but not nearly that, even though I feel like I can't go any faster. So I definitely am in a training mode where I'm trying to, when I'm done and I look at my watch, I go, okay, 220 minus age and 76,
Yes.
60% of that. How close am I? I'm close, but I still have a little bit more I can do. So I think the wearing the monitor can make it a little more objective when you're assessing, is that really working?
Yeah, yeah. So I'd say it's possible, but I use my yoga in a little different way to get my high intensity interval training is I will get it through perhaps a rowing machine or jogging or the elliptical or whatever I'm getting it through. And then I slow my heart rate by stopping and doing some yoga, doing some breathing, doing something that slows it. Because what's critical that I think the exercise world doesn't emphasize enough is the greatest benefits is when we challenge ourselves and then rest, challenge ourselves and then rest. So we want to get our heart rate up and then we want to bring it down. And yoga could be facilitating lowering that heart rate. And this is actually how a lot of traditional yoga practices did sun salutations. You would do sun salutations, and then you'd lie down in Shavasana. Beginning of class, like lie down in Shavasana. And then you'd get back up and you do your warrior poses, lie down in Shavasana. So when I would go to these ashrams and do yoga, that's how we would do it a lot of times in India. Lots of Shavasanas, lots of lowering our heart rate and our blood pressure, and then going back to it. And there's some wisdom in that. Based off of the research, that's one of the best things you can do to your heart. And that's why these exercise snacks and these yoga snacks are so great is we challenge ourselves. We do 30 seconds, 1 minute of chair poses in and out, and then we just sit back down and go back to our emails. That may be even more beneficial than doing the whole hour class where you had to, commit 3 hours of your day to it. And if you didn't do it, you felt really down. Like fitting these little breaks through your day actually could have a greater impact. And we're seeing that in the exercise science research world. I think we're going to start seeing that more and more in yoga research.
Hmm. I'm curious about the book. What was I know you're on your second version here.
Yeah.
What was I'm holding it. What was your inspiration for writing this book? What was your intention? Who's the intended audience? Because I know a lot of times people see the word science and they go, oh, I'm not science minded, so that's not for me. And yet a lot of what we're talking about here, all of what we're talking about here is so important for everybody to know. Anybody that wants to live a long, healthy life, talk about getting off the floor, even when you're in your 80s, is so important from a functional movement standpoint, let alone all the mental health benefits. So, what was the inspiration behind writing this and who's it intended for?
Science of Yoga is the book that I wish I had when I first started practicing, and then especially when I first started teaching yoga. So it's for practitioners who are, interested in science and getting motivation to practice, but it's really found its following with teachers and it's used in a lot of teacher trainings. And it's a great book for inspiration for teachers for their classes too. So I think it's for both practitioners and teachers, the science-minded practitioners, and then teachers who feel like they didn't get the anatomy and physiology background that they wish they could have because it's highly illustrated for those visual learners. I know a lot of us are visual learners, but then one of my favorite things is on my Instagram to see people tag me and post where they have the book sitting next to their yoga mat and they're integrating it into their practice and inspiring what they're doing it's for kinesthetic learners too. And so many yoga teachers and yoga practitioners are kinesthetic learners. We learn through our body. So that's one of my favorite things is just to see people tag me and they're like, "Oh, I'm practicing with it. It's something that's inspiring me. It's not just meant to be read. It's meant to be like felt. Touch your muscles. Feel what's going on as you're practicing."
So one of the things I'm also thinking of as we're talking, I mean, obviously we're talking about so many benefits you get from yoga. If we put ourselves in the shoes of not the student side of us, but the teacher side of us, right? Because most of my listeners are teachers. We have this limited time with the people who are coming to our classes to give them the sequence, cue them through the poses. What do you suggest for how to communicate these benefits? I mean, I talk about this a lot when I train teachers, this way of sort of standing out from other teachers and sharing the benefits. And this is, to me, one of the distinguishing marks of a really amazing teacher, somebody who is going into their classes and it's less, not that anybody intends it to be transactional, but if it focuses mainly on the cueing, it is sort of a transactional experience for the student. I come, I do the yoga, I go home. And then there's this other sort of elevated, in my mind, experience of a teacher who can bring in some of the benefits, who can add in conversations about lifestyle and benefits to lifestyle. So now the person is leaving with this elevated experience that transcends the transaction of the class, and now they're doing something else and maybe thinking back to something you said in class. So how do we, I mean, it's enough to just think about the musculoskeletal system benefits, and now we're talking about all these other benefits. How do you suggest that people begin to titrate this into their teaching?
Yes, I think that's critical to emphasize that yoga is lifestyle medicine and that we're going to make the biggest impact if it doesn't just affect them in that room, which it will, whether they leave and never think about you again. But if they do leave and they start thinking, oh, I could do this chair pose that she mentioned actually as a break when I'm sitting at the computer too long. I could do these shoulder rolls we do at the beginning of the class while I'm seated at my office chair. So as I'm teaching, I'll often say, I do this all the time when I'm in between emails. I look away from the screen and I do this little hand yoga routine that we're doing right now. So I give them little ideas of where they can fit these yoga snacks in. And that's what we know about habits is that if you can put the new habit, practicing and integrating yoga through your life, if you can put it next to something you're already doing, I'm going to eat a meal multiple times a day. I'm already doing that. So why don't I do some yoga snacks after the meal? And then you can explain to them the why, the benefits of why. Then they're going to be more likely to practice and they're going to have that elevated experience and trust you and come back to your class. This is why I train people who are already yoga teachers in the science of yoga, because when we can understand and communicate, when we can become a science communicator, and not in a way that turns people off, like where we're just throwing out muscle names. Nobody cares. My mom is a very smart woman, and she was like, "What's a hamstring?" after my class. I was like, "I can't believe I said that without pointing to it or saying your thighs," right? Like there's no value. Like that's not what they care about. But if we can really give them science-backed benefits to all the systems, to their life, to them getting down and gardening and down to play with their kids or grandkids, to them being able to sleep better and perform better at work. When we can explain them, they're going to be more likely to practice and more likely to come back to you.
Hmm. Yeah, it certainly is justification for learning the anatomy and the physiology and all of the different aspects, because it gives you so much more content to speak to that can really shift your classes, but also just give you more joy in helping people
Yeah.
understand. I think most people, after they take a class, they have that good feeling in their body. And it's cool to add in this other thing that's an objective assessment of why you feel so good when you're done.
Yeah. And it doesn't only help in this like studio. I think we're kind of speaking to a studio environment where you're
Yeah.
teaching students, but honestly, it's what helped me get my jobs in hospital environments and in retirement communities is like any pitch that I would have to go into those settings. That's what they wanted to hear is they wanted to hear evidence-based, evidence-informed. Here's the research. Here's how it's going to help them. Here's how it's going to help with balance and fall prevention, mental health. They have issues and they're looking for outcomes. So if you want to be in those sort of settings, which honestly, it was so fulfilling for me, but also it paid better as a teacher, to not have to like whether you're working individually and like kind of like asking people to pay you for money to not have to have that transaction, just to have the organization pay you. But it was a higher pay rate than any of the studios could pay me. So it was something that funded me to be able to go back and continue to learn. So if you want to work in those sort of environments, then studying the science of yoga at an in-depth level, getting certifications in this is really going to be impactful for you.
Yeah, I found over the years as I've worked in different settings like that, you can go in and negotiate the rate much more than when you go to a yoga studio. And there's literally dozens of teachers that if you don't take that job at $50 a class, there are 10 other people who they can hire to do that. So you have
Yes.
very little negotiating power and you're not really seen as the expert because you're in a yoga studio with all these other teachers. But when you go to a hospital or a nursing home, you're usually the only person in that role. You're coming in as the expert, and so you have better leverage to negotiate a lot of things, including the rate. So I love that you brought that up. It actually fits in nicely with a previous guest I had on about building a yoga business, and we talked primarily about privates, but she also talked about teaching in non-studio settings. So
Yes.
I love that this came up as well. I'd love to hear, I want to kind of ask you a couple of final questions. I'd love to hear, you've talked a little bit about in this episode, different things that you do. Just give us a sense of what kinds of, like, what does your life look like at this point? You wrote the book. It sounds like you've got from, just give us an idea of some of the moving pieces of, I want to say your business, but your life and your passion and what you love.
Oh my goodness. So, uh, I found my husband later in life and we got married. We met in Hawaii. So we were living in Hawaii on a beach. Like we were renting a house that we had a private beach. I'm really good at finding places on Zillow and on apartments.com. So I found this beautiful place. But then when I got pregnant, we moved to be closer to family. So we're in Washington State. Totally different vibe. And around Seattle area, we've decided just like yesterday. So this is like new info I'm sharing. We decided that the three of us, my husband, baby, and I, are going to buy an Airstream and start traveling the national parks. So
Oh,
that's going to be my life soon.
oh,
Yeah, so it's been a big shift for me having my first baby. And while I was pregnant, diving into the research and updating my Science of Yoga course in the reproductive area of how to teach for pregnancy, now that I had that embodied experience and I had a lot of complications, potential complications, that all turned out fine in my pregnancy that I was working with, like diabetes, gestational diabetes. And so that's one of the reasons why I've done this deep dive into metabolic health. So, applying it in my pregnancy was big and then that postpartum time, but I'm 6 months out now. My baby is 6 months old. So just getting back to teaching Science of Yoga certification. And I write books, So I have the Science of Yoga second edition. It came out during my maternity leave, which I can't believe. I was like staying up late working on that book launch. And then I have my other books, Meditation for the Real World, that I worked with Dr. Sarah Lazar and integrated a lot of the cutting edge science on meditation. So that came out relatively recently too.
yeah, cool. I'll just say one little thing you might be interested in. I watched the whole series. It was a special series she did. Erin French, who owns a restaurant in Maine called The Lost Kitchen. And she is a pretty famous chef. She has a series about her restaurant in Maine called The Lost Kitchen. But she did like a six-part series where she took a Gulf Stream from Maine all the way across the country and she stopped in different culinary type locations. But the entire six series is all about living in the Gulf Stream, cooking in the Gulf Stream, all this sorts of thing.
Mm.
So you might enjoy watching that. I absolutely loved. I said to my boyfriend, I feel like we need to buy a Gulfstream now and travel because it looked so cool. She was obviously doing a lot of cooking stuff that they showed, but it just looked like the neatest like space and looked really interesting. So
Yeah,
that,
we're really excited.
yeah, that gives you some inspiration. So it's the Lost Kitchen, and you'll see the six parts. It's on Discovery or something. Yeah, I can.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Okay, so let's do this. I would love to just tell the person who's listening, like, how do they find you if they're interested in enrolling in your certification? How do they do that? So what's your best suggestion for that?
Yeah, so go to www.scienceof.yoga. So not .com, but .yoga. And you'll find out about the second edition of the book, how to get some freebies, and get on the interest list for the Science of Yoga certification, which the next cohort starts May 13th. I think that's tomorrow in the day this is coming out.
May,
But
May 13th. Well, today's May 6th.
I thought today was May 12th
Oh
when we
gosh,
released that.
no. Today's only the 6th. I was like, are we fast forwarding through time?
We are. We are.
Yeah, so you have an
Yes.
extra week.
Yeah. So the book the course is launching May 13th for 1 week, and this is the last time I'm running it like with a live component. So if you're hearing this early on, go sign up for the interest list. You can find out more about that at scienceof.yoga. But if you're hearing this later, we're gonna have the course in the future too. I've worked on this Science of Yoga certification for what, like 7 years now. We've had hundreds of students go through it. So I will be continuing as future groups.
Yeah, that is great. That is great. Yeah, and this episode, today's the 6th, which is a Tuesday. This will go live on Monday.
Right.
So
The
people,
12th.
yeah, so I usually get a lot of listeners the day an episode goes live. So who knows, maybe you'll pick up some new students who listen on that day, which would be the day before. Yeah. So we're all good.
Okay. I don't know if you can clip out what I said because we got a little confused
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
but
And your Instagram, I connected with you on Instagram. Just tell people I'll put it in the show notes, but since they're listening, what's your Instagram handle?
at scienceof.yoga, at scienceof.yoga is my Instagram. And you can ask me any questions you have there. That's the best way to like be in direct contact with me. Ask me questions about the book, the course, just in general about Science of Yoga, something you read in the book, anything at all. Just my Instagram at scienceof.yoga.
Yep, and I know that you're also on YouTube. I'll be posting this video portion on my YouTube channel, so it'll be on YouTube as well, and you're on YouTube. So yeah, so that just helps people know kind of how to connect with you, and I'm glad we had a chance to
Yeah.
get the full picture. And I thank you so much for coming on the show. This is certainly a passion of mine. So I felt like I was able to kind of really get into some details with you that were just really good for me to learn as well. And I'm sure it'll be valuable to the
Well,
people.
thanks. I'm
So
glad you got your hands on Science of
yes,
Yoga.
yes, I love it. And thank you so much for sending me the copy. And it is absolutely beautiful. And I just wish you much continued success with the distribution of the book. So
Thank you.
thank you so much. And I'm going to send you this link on Monday and the video link.
Yeah.
We'll get this out into the world.
Yeah, we'll share on email. We actually gonna have an email go out Monday, so it'll be right
Oh,
in time for that boost for you.
perfect.
So we'll put that link in and we'll send it right after. I'll comment on it on YouTube. We'll share on Instagram. Where else? Yeah, wherever needed. You know, if you tag me anywhere, I'll share.
Great, because that's where have a lot of connections with.
Instagram.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect. Yes.
All righty. Well, thank you so much. And I will talk to you Monday.
Okay, sounds good.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.